Hello, this video is somewhat deceptively titled really. If I knew how to become a successful pop star, it would be like winning the lottery. I'd have already done it. Rather, it's about the elements that I think come into play when an act or a group or a star, whatever, captures the worldwide attention so much that they become colossal. I've got four basic ingredients really. Number one, sounding good. Number two, looking good. Number three, being entertaining. Number four, being politically aware. I'm going to draw quite a lot on the Beatles, but also I'll refer to other acts as well. I give this impression that my musical taste never really got beyond about 1972, and that's not quite true. I like music from all eras and all genres, but I don't like fake stuff. And so really, I'm going to sort of, as well as saying, you know, what's been great about certain acts, I'll also mention a few acts where sometimes some of these things worked against them, because it's a bit like a hi-fi system really. If any of its attributes shout out at you far more than all the rest, it can come back and hit you later on. So here we go then. Sounding good, and part of that is to do with talent, but talent is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. It means hard work. It means extending yourself, not constantly rehashing the same thing over and over again. And to look at acts like the Beatles and ABBA and to trace their careers, you do actually notice a development and a change with each album or each phase in their career. It won't happen with a 14-week pop show like X Factor. Yes, there have been a couple of success stories with X Factor, but by and large, who can remember the contestants? Who can remember who won 4 or 5 years ago? And if you can, how long did they last? And really, how good are they? Or how much effort and preparation had they put in before they got to that stage? It doesn't just happen by snapping your fingers and thinking that because you've got a tiny bit of a good singing voice that somehow or other it's all going to work. And where acts do give the impression of being picked up on the street and turned into pop stars, then usually there's an awful lot of studio trickery and what have you, that gets them there in the first place. You've only got to look at someone like Nick Cayman from the 1980s, who took his trousers off for a Levi ad in the middle of a laundrette. Suddenly launched into a pop career, and he had one hit single, I think, and then that was it. So, given that you've got to be talented, there's also nobody likes a geek, which explains why my videos aren't all that popular. And if you give the impression that you are a complete muso, then again that can be off-putting, and you don't need to look further than something like Take That. When Take That broke up in the late 90s, it was Robbie Williams who was the entertaining one, who could communicate with the crowds and that sort of thing, who was the massively popular one. And he, to his eternal credit, because he had a bit of an emotional downfall when he left Take That and got involved with perhaps certain bits of negative publicity, which didn't do him any favours. But having said that, he pulled himself out of it and it was, you know, by the fact that he's a talented all rounder, rather than Gary Barlow, who, yeah, he wrote loads of hit songs after that for other people and what have you. But in terms of his own solo career, he had, I think, one or two songs from an album, and then didn't really do anything else until Take That got back together again. Despite the fact that he is hugely talented, hugely musical, and whatever, it doesn't always work out that the most, you know, geeky muso makes it. Okay, it does come down to sound quality as well on your albums. I have mentioned the loudness war so often that I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but suffice to say that if an album only bears one listen before you just can't bear to listen to it anymore, then it's not going to do you any favours. Part of sounding good has to be originality, and in a way that's very difficult because A, there are only 13 notes in a musical scale and only so many ways that chords can be fit together to sound nice, but also the industry does not really like something that is so original, because it goes on, this was popular last week. And so, although you'll be untrendy if you still like last week's artist, we're going to manufacture a new one that does exactly the same. Okay, and so you got a huge herd of people that are all the same, and the industry is incredibly old-fashioned and in a way incredibly bigoted. You know, if you're, you know, and I am not a bigot, but, you know, if you're 3 black women, you're going to have a certain sound. If you're 4 scruffy blokes, then you're going to have a certain sound. If you're 4 fashionable blokes, then you're also going to have a certain sound. And it can't. The industry cannot get away from that. If you're white, you're a singer-songwriter. If you're black, you're a soul singer. It's just, you know, or an R&B singer, and it drives me mad, really. And for a group to be able to be original and to break free from that, as the Beatles did, it's just very, very difficult. Okay, and sort of following on from that, really, my second heading about looking good. First of all, you've got to have a fashion that is going to appeal to people and be easy to copy. And the Bay City Rollers got that exactly right, really. In those days, mums sewed patches on people's jeans when they got holes in them, and you know, to have an image where basically the clothes that you wore, you know, were basically patched up with tartan and that sort of thing, made it very, very easy to emulate and copy. Part of looking good is also to do with sex appeal, and that can work for or against. If it's innocent, then yes, that, you know, is absolutely fine. I mean, Frida, for example, of ABBA, she only has to open her mouth and she could be singing about, you know, the will being locked in the safe with the divorce papers, and her voice will still sound incredibly sexy. Just her manner is, you know, or was at the time, incredibly sexy. The same with Agneta. You know, she could wear as much blue eyeshadow as she wanted, and still, you know, when she she had in ABBA and in her solo things, one of her trademarks was to sing down your ear. Listen to Take a Chance on Me, for example, and it's incredibly alluring and incredibly sexy, and it has nothing to do with how little clothes you wear, or, you know, how you gyrate around on stage. And, you know, that, you know, even bands like Take That, they're playing to 12-year-olds. And, you know, I watched a concert of theirs on video. Sadly, I no longer have it. but each in one song, each of them took turns to be to gyrate and be as as seductive and sexy, and you're playing to 12-year-olds, and it's just not good, and it's even worse nowadays with groups like the Pussycat Dolls and Rihanna and people like that, and Shakira, that basically it doesn't matter how how bad or atrocious their singing is, as long as they can grind their asses, and so in that sense, then it can go too far. Prince, for example, took it far too far. I loved Prince's music in the 80s, but it was too much of a risk for the industry. They were never sure whether or not they could actually get away with playing his songs on the radio, especially the early ones. They were just, to a music industry that can't cope with somebody being gay, which I'll come on to in a second. They really couldn't go for what he was doing, and it ultimately, I think that was the main reason for his lack of popularity. Forget the fact that he came across as mysterious and a bit weird. It was really the fact that he was just too lewd, really. So sex appeal, but with innocence to it. Again, the Beatles and and ABBA, really, I think got it absolutely right, really, and loads of other groups as well. Loads of other groups. The downfall here again comes with what I've put on my notes as castration, really. Lots of acts, even John Lennon was told basically to hide his wife and baby from the press, because you've got to present this somehow. You're less attractive to girls if you're available, and it's particularly true with the male stars. Nick Kershaw in the 80s wasn't allowed to wear his wedding ring, for example, and it's repeated over and over again. And with some of the gay pop stars, like who's the guy now, Joe McElderry, for example. I listened to his album yesterday, and I'm sure that the public can cope with the fact that if he's going to sing a love song, then he's going to sing he in it instead of she, and still, they'll find it attractive. You've got to give people a chance, really. It's just it's pure bigotry, and they're told to do it. And while I was listening to Joe McElderry, I was looking at his lyrics, and there was some Twitter feed going on there, and the flack that the guy was getting, basically, because he's basically being manipulated by the industry, and he couldn't come out right at the very beginning, and the same with Will Young, and none of Will Young's major hits have ever expressed anything about his sexuality. And it's when you're talking about being a believable act for a public to look to and to respect and that sort of thing, it's part of you. And on the one hand you've got absolute ludicrous, almost semi-porn, and on the other hand you've got people that can't sing he or she, basically. I mean, things like groups like Taboo from the early noughties. I mean, there was a hint of lesbianism in their videos and their stage act, and it was all are they or aren't they? But I think that sort of just turned out to be a ploy to try and attract a certain male audience that gets turned on by those things, and it's just ludicrous, really. But yeah, give or take a few things, it might sound very superficial, but sex appeal is incredibly important for a good band that is going to, you know, be loved by everybody. As is Entertainment, which is number 3, and it's all about communication, having something worthwhile to sing about, something worthwhile to say, being able to put it across and carry it with you, and you know, talking about, you know, audiences and whether they're fickle or not. You've only got to look at punk now. For some reason or other, you know, those punk audiences liked to be spat on and abused and that sort of thing, and they got off on it. And some of the people that actually came out of that era, people like Gary Newman, for instance, who was, you know, he sort of post-punk sort of thing, and he was in a punk band to start with, or a band that played punky style music, and when he, you know, even in the 80s, when he was wearing sort of white suits and red ties, he could walk on stage and point to the audience and sing "Me, I Disconnect from You," and he's talking about the audience. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, the most flattering thing to say to them, and the audience are screaming and cheering at him because, you know, and he's carrying you with them. You know, again, look at Robbie Williams, who just is a born entertainer. Just can just one gesture or movement can actually carry a whole audience with him of thousands of people, and it's where it's the big downfall of the Beatles' career, because when they stopped touring, and George Harrison is on record as saying that the end of the touring for the Beatles was really the thing that facilitated the breakup a few years later, because they could not communicate. They, you know, the screams, the cheers, and everything else were just so loud and deafening that they couldn't hear themselves. The audience couldn't hear them, and they just went basically to scream and not listen to them. And so yeah, it's a huge thing. Again, you know, it's all very well being incredibly talented, but if you're rubbish as an entertainer, then you're going to find it very difficult. I watched Joan Armour Trading in concert last year, and you know, I love Joan Armour Trading, such a brilliant singer, and you stick one of her albums on, and you know, she's in the room with you, and you know, singing so beautifully, but to actually stand up and say something in front of a crowd, you know, she just doesn't want to do it. And, you know, it's, if you can't do that, you're alienating your public. Where, again, it goes wrong is this thing about ego, which I'm sure a lot has to do with drugs, which are absolutely rife in the music industry. And, you know, again, coming back to the Beatles, you know, the fact that, you know, they were so sort of coked up or heroined up in the case of John, and that sort of thing. You know, it basically, you know, especially with cocaine, you know, you just think you're the absolute bee's knees on cocaine, and you know, if somebody else, you know, dares to disagree with you, then you know, you're just obnoxious. I won't repeat what Gary Barlow said about what cocaine does to you, but suffice to say, he used a very rude word about what it turns you into. Yeah, so that can sort of, and often does, play against a group's success. Okay, now the politically aware one, I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, Billy Bragg or someone like that, you know, walks around with placards basically, and you know, down with this and up with that, and the next thing. There are some hugely successful bands that have made a career out of being political, but in general, what I mean is, do they reflect the times that they are living in? Does their music say something? You should be able to look back 40 years later and be able to tell, you know, what was trendy at the time, what was on people's minds at the time. You know, a song like Baby Driver, from Simon and Garfunkel on their last LP that they made together. Talking about, trendy methods of parenting, really, 3 trendy methods of parenting, and, each time hit the road and I'm gone. so, um, yeah, and, again, the Beatles, they were there at the right time, with 20 years after the Second World War, everything, everywhere, really, is miserable. The 50s and the rock and roll movement have proven to be very short-lived, and pop music had gone back to the Tommy Steeles and Cliff Richard in Summer Holiday and all that sort of thing, which was might be quite nice, but very soppy and again stage managed and didn't really express what was going on. And when you've got this really repressed youth, really, that can't, again, talk about their bodies, talk about sex, have sex, and everything's taboo. Suddenly, this group that are entertaining, they look good, they play excellent music, suddenly come onto the scene, and the world just went absolutely berserk. And fair play to them, really, because they somehow innately within their personalities, they just knew how to relate to a public. And really, I suppose that is what I'm trying to say. And it wasn't fake, it was them. And yeah, so I would say to anyone that says what is it about this group, look at those 4 headings and just see how much of a balance there is between those things, and do they really fall into those categories? Because if they don't, then it's likely that particular act is not going to stay around particularly long. Okay, it's been over 20 minutes, and owing to iMovie being a bit rubbish at the moment, and I don't know whether it's to do with Lion or whatever, this video is likely to be out of sync. So if it is, then I do apologise. Okay, just listen to me instead. Listen and learn, folks. Bye.